Night split open above the obsidian cliffs. Elias Thorn stood in the gale, hands shaking. Lira Vale stepped back as Lord Malrec tightened his grip on her wrist. The sea roared like a wounded beast. Elias said, "Tell me this is a lie." Lira said, "I made a choice you will hate." Malrec smiled, and the sky bled with auroras. A sigil flared in the sand, answering Elias's terror. Mara Wynn watched from the ridge, her cloak snapping like a flag. Finn Calder stumbled down the steps, breathless with dread. Cassian Dre lingered in the shadows, eyes bright with ruin. Sable Cade studied every face, unreadable as smoke. Elias said, "I would burn the curse from us." Lira said, "Love is a door that asks for a key we do not own." The tide surged, and the sigil screamed to the stars. Malrec said, "Power is simple arithmetic." The wind carried ash, and Elias's heart cracked like glass. Dawn smoldered behind storm clouds. A silence replaced the scream of wind. Elias walked the shoreline where the sigil had burned. He mouthed apologies to waves that could not forgive. Mara said grief bargains with anything that answers. He kept moving, counting breaths to cage the ache. Finn said, "Say what you need or the sea will keep it." Elias said, "She chose a door I cannot open." A gull cried like a torn promise. Mara said, "Doors are keys in disguise if you learn the lock." Sable watched from a dune, leaving no print. Cassian's shadow crossed the path, then vanished like a lie. The path climbed into ruins, older than maps. Stone arches wept moss as the wind spoke, in broken vowels. Mara said, "The archive keeps echoes of choices." Elias touched a carved pillar that hummed like memory. Finn said, "If echoes bite, I am leaving teeth behind." Sable drifted ahead, scouting with feline grace. Elias said, "If Lira is bound, I will unbind her." The stones warmed under his palm like a pulse. Mara said, "Power answers power, but it prices the call." A distant bell rang, though no bell stood there. They entered a chamber veined with old lightning scars. Shelves leaned under jars of sleeping light. Mara said, "Ask, and the archive asks back." Elias said, "Show me the thread that binds Lira." The jars brightened, answering like startled birds. Finn said, "This place breathes and we are in its lungs." A ribbon of blue flickered across the floor. Elias said, "Guide me and spare what remains of my heart." The ribbon split, revealing two paths. Mara said, "One is truth that wounds, one is mercy that lies." Elias stepped toward pain. The vision struck like cold iron. Lira stood on a balcony of black glass, city lights drowning in storm. Malrec traced a rune above her heart. Elias said, "Break from him and I will bear the cost." Lira said, "Cost is all we have left." The rune became a chain of light. Cassian stepped into view, torn between guilt and longing. He said, "Step back, Elias, before I finish what I failed to end." Sable whispered, "Masks over masks." The balcony cracked, and the vision snapped, leaving silence like a blade. The forest pressed close, branches slick with night rain. Elias knelt before a hollow stone where faint sparks clung like embers of a forgotten fire. He whispered, "This magic is not of light nor dark." Mara said, "It is tethered to hunger, not to choice." Finn crouched, brushing moss from a shard etched with Malrec's seal. He said, "This is his trail, stamped with arrogance." The air thickened as shadows coiled around roots. Elias said, "If I follow this, I invite the curse into my veins." Mara said, "Every vein already knows the taste of sorrow." The sigil flared, and the hollow shuddered like a drum. Finn's voice cracked, "Then we must burn it, or it will burn us." Elias pressed his hand to the stone, trembling with resolve that frightened him more than the dark itself. By the river's edge, dawn fractured into silver beams. Elias looked across the water where a figure in iron armor stood, cloak torn, face half hidden beneath a hood. The figure's voice carried, "Elias Thorn, I was sent to shield you or to break you." Elias said, "Then which command do you obey?" The figure lifted the hood, revealing Lira Vale, the protector. His gaze carried storms. Eric said, "I obey the weight of my oath, though it rots me." Finn muttered, "Oaths rot faster than wood in rain." Mara narrowed her eyes, reading the scars across Eric's armor. Elias said, "If you guard me, you must guard my heart as well." Eric's silence was thunder in flesh. The path narrowed through jagged hills, shadows deepening into caverns. Eric walked at Elias's side, every step clashing with silent storms. A cry tore the air as Malrec's riders surged from the fog, armored with runes. Finn shouted, "Run or bleed!" Elias raised his hands, light scattering from his fingertips, trembling with raw force. Mara said, "Control it or it will own you." Eric drew his blade, the steel a silent vow. Runes blazed as the riders charged. Elias said, "If this is fate, then let it shatter here." The earth groaned, answering his defiance. At twilight, they rested in the ruins of a watchtower. The air smelled of old soot and forgotten prayers. Mara laid out brittle pages, glyphs etched in fading ink. She said, "The prophecy threads through your veins, Elias." He said, "Tell me all of it, not in fragments." She looked away, shadows clutching her features. Mara said, "If truth breaks you, what use is it?" Finn said, "Better broken by truth than bent by lies." Eric stood apart, silent, watching horizon fires. Elias said, "If destiny hunts me, I'll hunt it back." Mara closed her eyes, whispering words older than kingdoms. Night deepened, stars tearing open through cloud gaps. Elias stood close to Eric beneath a broken arch. The air crackled with the hush of unspoken truths. Elias said, "Every step pulls me further from who I was." Eric said, "Who you were cannot save you." Their eyes met, the silence thick with forbidden gravity. Elias said, "If I fall, let it be for more than vengeance." Eric's voice broke, "If you fall, I fall with you." Finn stirred by the fire, muttering dreams, unaware. Mara sat in shadow, listening to destinies entwine like blades in the dark. Rain softened to a hush as the road bent toward a windmill broken like a rib cage. Finn trudged ahead, whistling a tune that dared the clouds to answer. He said, "If doom waits, let it at least applaud." Elias managed a dry smile as mud gripped his boots. Mara said, "Levity is a blade if you learn the balance." Eric scanned the fields, measuring distances like sins. Sable drifted from a hedgerow with a grin stitched from secrets. "What is my one sowing that will malve me shape?" "What?" she said. "You step loud enough to wake the dead." Finn bowed. "Then they will not be lonely." The windmill groaned, and a hidden door coughed dust. Elias said, "If Lira left a trace, it will be inside." Sable's gaze sharpened, or a trap begging for company. Inside, gears slept under cobweb veils, and a circular floor traced with faded sigils. Mara said, "Stand within the ring, and breathe like a bell." Elias stepped to center, pulse drumming louder than the rain. Eric said, "Anchor your weight, and let fear pass through." Finn chalked fresh lines, tongue between teeth in fierce focus. Sable watched from the stairs, a cat measuring a window. Elias raised his hands, light shivering like a fevered bird. He said, "If I call too hard, it will break me." Mara said, "If you call true, it will mend you." The ring woke, and the room tilted with quiet thunder. Eric's palm hovered near, a promise and a warning together. Dusk bled into violet as the lesson ended, and the ring cooled. Elias sat against a beam, chest aching from restrained power. Eric knelt, unfastening a dented pauldron with careful hands. He said, "You reached without breaking." Elias said, "I reached toward what hurts." Finn set bread on a crate like a peace treaty. Mara said, "Pain is a teacher that charges triple." Sable traced the chalk with a boot tip, erasing doubt and drawing it back again. Elias said, "If love survives this, it will not resemble softness." Arik said, "Softness is a myth sharpened by need." Their eyes held until the wind remembered to breathe. A metal knock split the quiet as the hidden door swung wider than before. Cassian stepped from the dark rain, glittering on lashes like shards. He said, "I followed the wrong star and called it duty." Elias stood, breath hitching on old summers. Arik's jaw hardened into winter. Finn whispered, "Ghosts have better timing." Cassian said, "Malrec baited the trap with promises about her." Sable's smile vanished like ink in water. Mara said, "Confession is not currency here." Cassian looked at the ring, then at Elias, and grief pulled tight as a garrote. He said, "I broke the bridge you needed, and the river learned your name." Thunder rolled low, as if the hills practiced menace. Cassian spread a soaked parchment across the crate, sigils writhing like hooked eels. He said, "Malrec will bind the city's heart at moonrise." Mara traced the ink and flinched at its heat. She said, "This script drinks intent." Elias said, "Then let it choke." Arik moved closer, a wall with breath. Finn said, "If the city's heart stops, ours become echoes." Sable said, "He wants you to look and see only rage." Elias closed his eyes and saw Lyra's face through smoke. He said, "I will see her, and I will see the cost, and I will choose with open eyes." Mist clung to the marsh as night bent low. The group moved slow, reeds whispering like thieves. From nowhere, a figure in shifting skin emerged, smile sharp as broken glass. Sable hissed, "The shapeshifter comes late." The figure said, "I come when truth drowns." Elias raised his palm, light trembling like an uncertain oath. Arik said, "Speak allegiance or be cut down." The figure's form flickered, showing faces of friend and foe alike. Finn muttered, "Masks wearing masks until no faces left." Mara whispered, "Every lie knows the weight of its shadow." Elias said, "Then let shadow earn its name." The marsh wind swallowed the words. By dawn, the company crossed to an abandoned bridge. Elias stood near the edge, staring at waters dragging ghosts downstream. Lyra's echo bloomed in his mind, her words cutting deeper than the chill. Arik stepped close, jaw hard. He said, "She has gone into his hand." Elias said, "If she breathes, she waits." The shapeshifter leaned against the railing, voice smooth. "He will offer her chains painted as crowns." Mara frowned. "Chains eat crowns with time." Finn said, "Then break the bridge and be done." Elias whispered, "Break it, and hope drowns with her." Silence bled into the rushing water. In the thickets, silence tore apart as riders stormed in, blades painted with rune fire. Finn yelped, dropping to cover. Arik drew steel, carving arcs of defiance. Elias shouted, "Hold the circle!" Mara slammed her staff, light cracking through dirt like roots of thunder. The shapeshifter laughed, melting into two riders' forms before snapping back with mockery. Sable struck from shadows, knives flashing. Cassian appeared from nowhere, blood on his sleeve, voice raw. He said, "Fight or fall, no other choice." Elias's magic flared, and the trees screamed like broken bells. That night, under fractured moonlight, Mara unrolled the prophecy fully. Elias bent over the parchment, each word searing his breath. Mara said, "The heart you chase is both your chain and your blade." Elias said, "Then love is written as a curse." Arik said, "Or as armor if you claim it." Finn muttered, "Armor cracks." Sable whispered, "And chains drag." The shapeshifter said, "Every prophecy is bait carved for fools." Mara snapped, "Yet fools survive when the wise are silent." Elias pressed his hand to the ink, voice shaking. "If I am fool, then let it be for her." At the valley's rim, shadows thickened as Cassian blocked the path. His voice was frayed steel. "You want her, but I lost her first." Elias's chest hollowed. Arik raised his sword steady. Cassian said. Malrec offered salvation, and I was weak enough to believe. Sable muttered, weakness sells cheaper than truth. Mara lifted her staff, but Elias raised a hand. He said, stand down, his fight is mine. Cassian's eyes burned with ruin and regret. He whispered, then bleed with me, old friend. Thunder cracked, echoing a grief too deep for words. Wind hammered the valley as Elias and Cassian circled, breath turning to knives. Cassian said, I traded hope for a leash and called it mercy. Elias said, cut it or I will. Steel sang and memory bled through every swing. Arik stepped forward, then stopped at Elias's raised hand. Mara said, end this before your hearts learn war as home. Finn whispered, please choose living over winning. Cassian lunged, grief blazing brighter than skill. Elias caught the blade with light that shook his bones. He said, I will not kill what once saved me. Cassian staggered, eyes flooding with a summer long gone. He said, then I will carry my ruin where it belongs. They reached the city rim where towers clutched thunder. The streets trembled with runes like fever. Sable, said he braided the wards into the sewer veins. Mara said, break the knot, not the artery. Arik studied the pattern, jaw locked. He said, a cut here, and the web collapses. Finn swallowed fear like glass. He said, if the web falls, will the roofs? Elias touched the sigils and felt Lira like heat through frost. He said, she is near the heart line. The shapeshifter smirked from shadow. Near is a word, knives use. Elias breathed once, then twice, and chose the narrow stair into dark. Beneath the city, arches sweated salt, and chains hummed with borrowed stars. Lyra stood within a ring of iron thorns, eyes bright with defiance and fear. Malrec said, love is a key that opens coffers of power. Elias said, power counts corpses and calls it wisdom. Arik moved to flank, blade low. Mara whispered, he bound her to the city's pulse. Finn gripped a wrench like a relic. Sable traced counter runes with quick economy. Lira said, do not trade yourself for me. Elias said, I will trade everything except being yours. Malrec laughed, and the ring tightened like a verdict. Malrec opened his palm, revealing a fragment of glass that carried a heartbeat. He said, this shard holds the echo of your first vow. Elias felt the room tilt. Mara said, do not touch that history. Malrec smiled. Choose, and I free her or the city. Arik growled. He lies in perfect circles. Lyra said, Elias see me, not the phantom. Finn muttered, a bargain that eats both sides. Sable said, break the shard, break his leverage. Elias said, I will not let a memory decide our future. He faced the shard and the ring, and the man who wore winter as perfume. Elias lifted both hands and split his light in two paths. He said, city first, then her, and I will not fail either. Malrec hissed as the wards shook like a trapped beast. Arik drove forward and shattered a hinge the size of grief. Mara intoned a counterline that tasted of salt and ash. Finn hauled a lever until his shoulders screamed, and gears obeyed. Sable cut a final knot that bled sparks. Lira said, do not spend your soul. Elias said, it is already invested. The ring fractured with a cry, and the city exhaled like a drowning thing finding shore. The city's breath slowed, but the storm did not ease. In the old citadel, Elias stood before broken windows, preparing for the inevitable. Arik said, every blade is sharpened by choice. Elias said, then let mine cut clean. Mara lit incense that curled like prayers, refusing to die. Finn packed his satchel with trembling hands, whispering jokes to mask his fear. Sable, said battles are coins, and we spend ourselves. Cassian, bruised and bitter, leaned against the wall. He said, if I stand with you, I betray him. If I stand against you, I betray myself. Elias touched the stone, feeling Lyra's presence through every crack. He whispered, I will not let him cage her again. Night crept close and fire cracked in the courtyard. Elias and Eric stood apart from the others, shadows long on the stones. Elias said, "Every step forward feels like treason to who I was." Eric said, "Then betray him. Become who you must." Their gazes locked, the silence heavier than armor. Finn stirred in his sleep, murmuring half a song. Sable turned her back, pretending not to listen. Mara said, "Love is not a weapon, yet it fights harder than steel." Elias whispered, "If tomorrow burns, let this moment remain." Eric's hand hovered close, trembling like a vow half-spoken. The battlefield stretched wide under a violet dawn. Malrec's army poured like ink across the hills, banners etched with runes. Elias said, "He brings the sky itself as weapon." Mara lifted her staff, murmuring a litany that burned her throat. Finn swallowed terror and said, "I will not hide this time." Sable smirked, knives glinting like small rebellions. Eric said, "Stay with me, and I'll carve us a path." Cassian pulled his hood low, shame dragging his voice. "I will fight, but redemption does not return the dead." Lira's cry echoed across the wind, bound within Malrec's circle. Elias raised his hands, light bending the air. The clash thundered like gods waking. Elias hurled fire and ash, the ground answering with screams. Eric fought with relentless precision, steel carving arcs of defiance. Finn darted between shadows, pulling wounded clear. Mara's voice cracked as her spells ripped the sky. Sable vanished and reappeared, knives in throats before blood knew it flowed. Cassian confronted Malrec, blades sparking against runes. He shouted, "I will not kneel again." Malrec sneered, "Then die standing." Lira reached from within the circle, tears burning like acid. Elias roared, power breaking free of restraint, as if his heart itself had become lightning. At the heart of the storm, Elias and Malrec collided, magic splitting sky and stone. Malrec said he will trade love for ash and call it victory. Elias said, "I will trade nothing. I will keep her and the city." Their power struck, tearing the circle. Eric shielded Elias from falling debris. Mara collapsed, drained, whispering prayers. Finn screamed defiance, voice cracking. Sable hurled her last blade, shattering a rune stone. Cassian faltered, blood darkening his chest, but drove steel into Malrec's flank. Lira's chains snapped as light poured through. Elias shouted, "This ends now!" The world answered with silence and fire. Silence fell after the last thunder, heavy as a vow unspoken. Smoke lifted from the broken circle and drifted toward a paling sky. Elias knelt, palms seared, breath scraped thin by victory and fear. Lira stumbled to him, chains fallen like shed skin. She said, "You kept both promises." He said, "Only because you kept me." Eric stood over them, a watchful wall chipped by mercy. Mara rose on shaking legs and whispered, "Thanks to names older than war." Finn laughed and cried, a sound stitched from shock and relief. Sable counted the living as if numbers could bless them. Cassian swayed, hand pressed to a deepening red. He said, "I am late to honor, but I am here." The wind answered with a gentler rain. They carried their wounded into the Citadel Chapel, where dust glowed like patient stars. Mara bound cuts with strips of prophecy, each knot a small forgiveness. Eric said, "Walls still stand when hearts do." Finn brewed bitter tea that tasted like courage trying to be sweet. Sable laid out blades and wiped them clean of sorrow. Lira touched the old altar and said, "I will not be a prize again." Elias said, "You are the author, not the artifact." Cassian's breath thinned, eyes fixed on a window where dawn kept arriving. He said, "Do not waste me." Elias gripped his shoulder and nodded. The chapel listened and remembered every vow. Cassian beckoned Elias close, voice frayed to thread. He said, "I walked away from love and called it strength." Elias said, "You walked back and called it truth." Cassian smiled like someone remembering summer. He pressed a token into Elias's hand, a small piece of the life they almost shared. Lira said, "Rest, and let the living repay the debt." Mara murmured a passage that gentled the air. Finn stood very still, as if motion might spill his grief. Arik bowed his head, a soldier saluting a brother not by blood. Cassian exhaled, and the room softened around the space he left behind. At the city heartline, the wards lay cracked but breathing. Lira and Elias traced new sigils over old scars. Lira said, "No crowns, no cages." Elias said, "Only choices that we sign with our names." Arik coordinated crews to raise fallen beams and rites. Mara taught children to read the gentler glyphs. Finn mapped fresh routes so trade would not limp. Sable brokered uneasy truces and tucked away secrets that might bloom into safety. The shapeshifter lingered at the edge like weather. They said I could sell this piece or keep it. Elias said, "Keep it and surprise yourself." The city listened and decided to hope. Night returned clear, stars polished by rain. On the citadel roof, Elias and Lyra stood where wind sang softer songs. And Lyra said, "We were broken, and still we chose." Elias said, "We were chosen, and still we chose." Arik passed below with a tired wave, a guardian learning rest. Mara smiled from a balcony, content to be small against the vast. Finn and Sable argued gently about where to hide the last blade. The bells tolled once, not for grief but for measure. Elias said, "If darkness asks again, we answer together." Lyra kissed him, and the city answered with light that felt like home.